just any day. It's not Tuesday through Monday or Friday through Thursday. A week of 7 days begins on Sunday and ends on Sabbath. The passage of time, meaning months, years, seasons, they never ever disturb the weekly cycle. Ancient man that was separated by deserts, rivers, mountains, and continents knew of the weekly cycle. And 160 ancient nations named the seventh day of the week the same, the Sabbath rest, that proves that each week begins with Sunday. The week was synchronized with a one-time event that no one saw except Adam and Eve. Every seventh day is an anniversary to God's creation. Happy anniversary. Now we're going to zoom forward to the Exodus. And at the time of the Exodus, the Lord said to Moses in Exodus 12:1, that this month shall be unto you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year to you. Now, why does this not make sense? Because during the flood, it was the 10th day of the month. It was the 15th day of the month, so they had months. Why is this different? This is different because the Lord was about to impose upon them regulations, feasts, and ceremonies and obligations that required a special way of keeping a different time. They would have to learn about weeks and weeks of years. They'd have to learn how to keep time different because they were about to come out of the desert and build a sanctuary and have to have all these feasts, and they needed a different way of keeping time rather than just eternal straight month after month. So they needed a religious calendar. So at the time of the Exodus, God gave us 3 new clocks. He gave us a week of 7 months. Pretty simple. He gave us a week of 7 years. Still pretty simple. 7 weeks of 7 years. It gets a little more complicated for some people, and it did for me. But God aligned those additional clocks with the existing 4 clocks at Creation Week so that all 7 clocks operate harmoniously together and they're all perfectly synchronized with each other. Are you confused? Too many 7s? Too many weeks? I was. The first one, a week of 7 months, that's pretty simple. It runs like in Exodus 12:1. This month, Moses, month 1, is going to be Nisan, your first month of your religious calendar. And it's going to go through the 7th month, which is Tishri. And all of your feasts are going to be during this week of 7 months. Pretty simple. Now we get to a week of 7 years. Basically, it's pretty much the same, except that it's years instead of months. So it becomes pretty simple also. Year 1 through year 7, the Exodus from 1437 BC, 7 years later, is 1431 BC. Now they needed this clock for both crops and slavery, because God was going to require them to let the land rest in the 7th year. So he needed to show them this way of keeping time for that. And also, you had to free the slaves in the 7th year after they worked for you for 6. So this clock served 2 purposes. And that's a pretty simple clock. This is where it gets a little more complicated for some folks. The 7 weeks of 7 years. It's also known as the 49-year clock. It's also known as one complete Jubilee cycle. I'm going to show you a better one later, but this is just one I made to show you the 49 years and how each of the groups of 7 years are actually grouped into 7 years of Sunday, 7 years of Monday, 7 years of Tuesday, all the way through Sabbath. In Leviticus 25, God required a special sabbatical rest for the land. Land was restored to its original owners. During the 49 years, they could sell or lease to their fellow kinsmen, but the first 6 months of the 50th year, God mandated return of the land to its original family. That was in the Sunday year, which was the 50th year. Now, the 50th year, and again we're getting confusing, was also the first year of the following Jubilee cycle. It was year 50, but it was also year 1 of the next one. Still confused? I was. If I was, I know you are. Later on, we're going to show you that even on a better way to figure it out. So we've seen 7 great clocks of God so far. Oops, but wait. There's more. There seems to be another clock. Why is the devil tied down for 1,000 years? Is it possible that the devil's forced to rest from his evil works for a sabbatical millennium so that the earth can rest from sin? Did God create the weekly template at creation to also give us a clue in our research, overturning the rocks? If so, there's one more clock, which is difficult for me because God's perfect number of 7 now goes to 8. We're going to call this clock the Grand Week. And that Grand Week is 10 centuries of 10,000 years each that equals 7,000 years or 7 millennia. And it began when sin began. Then it continues for 6,000 years until the second coming. And then there's a Sabbath millennial rest. At the end of that 1,000 years, sin is destroyed and the earth made new. So what did we learn so far? We learned that time equals God's great clocks. Now, let's start applying the time. And when we do that, it's referred to as timing. So how do we use God's time, or his clocks, and his timing for interpreting Bible prophecy? End-time prophecies have time words in them. You saw that at the beginning when I showed you those terms in Daniel and Revelation. Years, months, weeks, days, hours, time, times, and half a time. So do we assume that all time references are actual, meaning a day equals 1 day? Or is there some formula to convert time? That is, 1 day equals 1 year, or time equals 1 year. Sometimes a day means a day, but sometimes a day means a year. God uses both time conversions in prophecy. But there's an easy way to determine which time conversion God is using. Let me show you the problem first. In Numbers 14, the Lord replied, "Your children will be shepherds here for 40 years. For 40 years, 1 year for each of the 40 days you explored the land." And in Ezekiel, during the 430-year apostasy, the Lord said, after you finish this, lie down again, and this time on your right side, for I have assigned you 40 days, a day for each year. 1 day equals 1 year in these prophecies, and because God told us so. It was very clear. Now, in the 70 weeks prophecy, in Daniel 9:24, God declared that 70 weeks are decreed for your people and your holy city to finish transgression, to put an end to sin, to atone for wickedness, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. 70 times 7 equals 490 days. And if a day equals a year, then 70 times 7 would equal 490 years. 1 day equals 1 year fits perfectly with this text. Well, in Revelation 20, God says when the 1,000 years are over, Satan will be released from his prison. Oh, bean counters. 1,000 times 360 equals 360,000 days. And at a day for a year, we are looking at 360,000 years. 1 day equals 1 year does not fit for this text. Both texts are prophetic, but one uses day equals a year, and one uses a day equals a day. How confusing. The solution? Timing. The Jubilee calendar determines how God converts time in prophecy. What in the world is the Jubilee calendar? And we're going to take a break now, and when we come back, we're going to make it even more simple from the beginning.